Good afternoon and welcome. We're going to give everyone just another minute or two before we jump in and start today's webinar on fortifying your database, how to keep your database secure. So we will be utilizing the chat and the Q&A feature today. So if you want to take a look and get those opened up, you'll be able to communicate with us through there. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We're incredibly excited to sponsor today's webinar, Fortifying Your Database, How to Keep Your Database Secure. On behalf of Fortified Data, we've brought a team of experts today to share some of their best practices, knowledge they've learned over the years. So I'm going to start by introducing our team, and then we'll kick it off to our main presenter today for her to dive in. As I mentioned with some housekeeping, feel free to pop in a question into the Q&A or the chat. We'll be monitoring those, typing back, as well as trying to interject while Angela's presenting if there's anything we can go into more detail for. So this webinar will be recorded and sent to you following this presentation today. So to start off, our team, we've got two of our senior consultants on the line to monitor the Q&A. So we have Chris Shaw, who's a senior consultant and technical lead on our managed services team. He is located in sunny Florida. We have Brenda Bentz, who is also a senior consultant on our managed services team. She's coming to us from Pennsylvania. We have Miss Olivia Smith, who is our intern, who is soaking up all she can throughout the summer, and she's located in Ohio. Myself, I'll be the moderator. My name is Andrea Kircher. I'm the Director of People and Strategy at Fortified Data. And then our main presenter today is Miss Angela Henry. She's a principal consultant on Team Fortified Data. She comes to us as an MVP since 2018. That in itself deserves a little round of applause. She's a Microsoft certified trainer since 2020. She's an MC, SE in business intelligence. She's Microsoft certified Power BI data analyst associate. She's a Microsoft certified Azure Enterprise Data Analyst Associate as well, and just all around fabulous. So please help me welcome Angela Henry.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrea. Super glad to be here and super excited that we are doing this webinar because security should be very top of mind for everybody. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to talk about just some security basics for your databases. We'll talk a little bit about threat detection and mitigation, and then we'll finally end up talking about encryption and data masking. And then at the end, we should have enough time, but hopefully for about 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A. So if you've got questions, like Andrea said, feel free to put them in the chat, the Q&A section, whatever works for you. If you are going to put them in the chat, maybe put a little Q in front of it so that we know it's an actual question and not just banter going back and forth. That helps the folks who are answering the questions in the chat. And then if we've got some that are really kind of relevant and need clarification, we'll have somebody interrupt me and we'll go through the question while we're going through the slide deck here. So with that, let's just jump right in and let's talk about security basics. There are some fundamental concepts that I think are super important for people to understand. And when we talk about those fundamental concepts, there's 4 of them. We're going to start talking about access. And we're not talking about just digital access. We need to stop and think about physical access as well. I know that a lot of folks have their infrastructure hosted in the cloud, so it's not really top of mind that you really need to think about physical access. But if you are still in an on-prem situation, physical access is definitely a concern. And you may laugh, but one of the things that I think about is I was just watching a TV show, and it takes place in a law firm, and somebody was walking through the entire office. It was empty. It was just this one person, and they had a great screen, or the screen. Every single workstation had their um, computer unlocked. And I was like, oh my gosh, just think if somebody got in there that wasn't supposed to be in there, that's physical security. If you're leaving your machine unlocked and you give people physical access to it, that could be a problem. But digital security, that's a really big one too. And really, when we talk about digital security, you should be following that principle of least privilege. And what we mean by that is you are only granting the access a user needs, whether it's specific data, resources, applications, in order to complete the required tasks for their daily job. They don't need anything more. So when we talk about it with respect to databases, if somebody doesn't need to do anything other than read data, do not grant them permissions to modify that data. And if we take that another step further, if they don't need to be doing any administrative activities, then they should just be limited to the databases that they need to access and not the server level access itself. Early in my career, one of the things that happened to me, I was right out of college, and I issued a delete statement without a where clause in a production environment. Oh my gosh, yeah. That table had about 30 million records in it. That happened because the development database and the production database were on the same server, and I wasn't paying close attention like I should, and I meant to delete records from development, but I was in production. That would not have happened had my digital access been principle of least privilege. Nobody should be modifying data directly in production. So you really need to keep that in mind. It's both physical and digital access when we talk about access to your databases. Next, there's encryption. You need to make sure that your data is safe both at rest and in motion. And with SQL Server, and we are mostly a Microsoft shop, we do some Oracle and we do some MySQL and some Postgres as well. But with SQL Server, starting in 2019, transparent data encryption became available in the standard edition. It was no longer an enterprise feature. So honestly, there's no reason to not be using TDE if you were on SQL Server 2019 or above. You've also got row level security out there. That's going to help you lock down those rows if you've got sensitive data in there and you don't want people to see specific pieces of data. Great example is HR. Not everybody needs to know what everybody makes. So your HR people do need to know that, but nobody else does. So you can use row level security to make sure that that data is not exposed to somebody who's not allowed to see it. There's always, or excuse me, there's also always encrypted. You can use that. And then there's data masking. And we'll talk more about that at the end. Another fundamental of database security is backups. And a lot of people forget about their backups when it comes to security. They usually think of their backups as a way to recover from a disaster. We've got folks down in Florida, they have hurricanes all the time. We've got people on the West Coast, they get mudslides out there. That's not the only reason for a backup. You need to ensure that those backups are secure. And I don't know if anybody was paying attention, but there was a case in the news recently about a company who actually had the hard drive stolen out of their machines, and they did not encrypt their backups. And they had no security protection on them whatsoever. So not only were the drives stolen, but because there was no encryption or any security placed on those backup files, those bad actors were able to access the entire data estate for this organization. So it's not it's not just your data itself, it's the backups and where the backups live. And, in today's ever-growing world of cyber attacks, there's no excuse not to back up your database. You've got so many options available. If you're using TDE, that's going to be encrypted, right off the bat. And you've got some other features that are available out there as well. So make sure you do your research and make sure that you are securing your backups, not just your databases. Then there's auditing. Now, most people think that if you're not in a heavily regulated industry like finance or healthcare, that you don't really need to worry about auditing. Well, I'm here to tell you that's not true. And I realize that auditing has some negative connotations. I'm going to thank the IRS for that one because nobody wants to be audited by the IRS. But really, auditing can provide some preventative measure out there. And if you audit your system on a regular basis, that's going to help you identify any patterns that can lead to potential security breaches. So when we talk about auditing, you really need to put processes in place that are going to start collecting that data on a regular basis. And then as part of that process, schedule something on a regular basis to meet and go over the results of that auditing. And starting in SQL Server 2016 SP1, that's when Microsoft moved a lot of enterprise features down into the standard edition, and auditing was one of them. So that is available for you out there to start using without having to purchase the enterprise edition. So when we look at all of these things together, any one of them can help you, but implementing all of them together allows you to build layers of security and protect your data. So I would highly recommend not just one, but look at all four of those fundamentals and implement something in there to provide those extra layers of security. Do we have any questions out there before we head to our next section? I'm looking in the chat here. I'm not seeing.
I don't see any yet. Feel free to
Okay.
drop anything in and we'll definitely dive deeper if there's an area of interest.
Okay. Awesome. All right. Well, I'm going to grab a quick drink really quick. All right. So now we've talked about the fundamentals. Let's talk about the different threat types that are out there. There's basically two types. You've got the invisible and the visible. And understanding those threat types in today's world, that's going to help you understand what security measures you need to implement to keep your data safe. So what's visible to us? Insiders. We've got people walking around pretending to be somebody that they're not. So that's a big one. Human error. That happens all the time. People, I accidentally did this. I accidentally did that. So those are things that are visible to us. That's the human factor. But what's invisible to us are those digital things. So things like SQL injection. If you've got software vulnerabilities, I mean, that's why Microsoft pushes patches out. Data corruption, all of those things are threats to your security. And you need to understand them so that you can implement stuff, put security measures in place to keep your data safe. So in addition to the threat types, we've got some common vulnerabilities that are out there. And these are things that hackers are looking for and leveraging to access your data. So the first one is default or blank passwords. And I'll take this even a step further. Really simple passwords like password 1. Yeah, that's really easy to guess. Your dog's name. If anybody knows anything about you and they know you're a pet person, don't use your dog's name. I am a dog person. I do not use my dog's name. Winston, nope, he is not part of my password at all. And there's there was another story recently in the news about a breach that happened because the default password for the SA account on the SQL Server had never been changed. Now, in the Wayback Time Machine, Microsoft, when they first released SQL Server, it was not secure by default. And the password for the SA account, the system administrator account, was blank by default. So that's Microsoft has since changed their stance and they have moved to a more secure by default. But there are things that you can do to prevent default or blank passwords. There's password policies that you can use. If you're going to be using SQL authentication, use those password policies to make people, force them to use complicated passwords. If you're using Azure Active Directory or on-prem Active Directory, and you've got security or password policies in place there, those will come in if you are using Windows authentication within SQL Server. So highly recommend using those password policies to ensure you've got complex passwords out there and not things that aren't easy to guess. SQL injection. This is a really big common vulnerability. And SQL injection happens when you allow input from a user or an application to be sent directly to the SQL engine without any proper controls in place to prevent malicious code. Now, I mean, everybody has to supply data to their database. So how do you make this secure? Well, you've got a couple of methods. Within SQL Server, you can put wrappers around input that comes in. You can use stored procedures, all those kinds of things. And I don't know if anybody remembers this, but there was a meme that came out back, I think it was either the late 90s, early 2000s. One of the countries over in Europe had decided to use visual recognition software so that they could read license plates and then automatically hand out speeding tickets. Well, one data guy got a great idea and he put a little template above his license plate that said semicolon drop database semicolon. So thankfully the system that read that, you actually needed to provide a database name, so it didn't do any damage. But the moral of the story here is it's anywhere and everywhere. So you need to really be sure and you're protecting your systems from that SQL injection. So take a look at all of your code that's out there and see if it's vulnerable to SQL injection. And if you're if you are writing code, you need to make sure that every piece of code you write is going to prevent SQL injection attacks in your environment.
Angela, Robert in the chat also had a suggestion for the default or blank passwords, and he said mnemonic devices are good to remember complicated passwords as well.
Oh, yes, that is awesome. So one place that I worked, I had an Irish gentleman who worked with me. He was one of our system administrators, and he had this song that he used to sing all the time. And he used the first letter of each word for like the first 3 lines, and that was his password. So that's just giving people ideas out there. You put those letters together randomly, doesn't mean anything. And so that's a great idea. Thanks, Robert. All right, permissions. So this goes back to what I was talking about at the beginning with the principle of least privilege. Hackers count on DBAs being lazy. Now, I like to think of myself as efficient and not lazy, but let's face it, sometimes it's just easier to grant more permissions than are needed to a user than fighting the good fight and using the principle of least privilege. Everybody has fallen into this trap. I'm going to tell you, don't do it. Don't fall into that trap. Be thoughtful in how you grant permissions and make sure that you have a process in place and that it's actually followed. I I've been to a couple of places where they've said, oh, you need this. Oh, I'll just give you system admin rights. And I'm like, no. I don't need system admin rights. I only need to be able to read the data. So please don't do that. And again, this goes back to the story that I told at the beginning where I had been granted the ability to modify data in a production environment when I shouldn't have been. And that turned into a disaster. So make sure that you are following the principle of least privilege when it comes to permissions. You can even use the just in time. So if somebody says, oh, I need to do this, but I only have to do it this one time, grant them the permission they need to do that. As soon as they are done with that, take that permission away. Lots of things with permissions out there to help protect your data estate. Misconfigurations. So like I said, back, when SQL Server was first released, it was not secure by default. And this was true for, with a lot of the configurations that actually came with SQL Server. And one of the big ones that's out there, it's no longer unsecure by default, is XP Command Shell. And what this does is it allows you to execute commands at the operating system level. Now, if you understand the risk that is involved with using that, then absolutely make sure you put measures in place to safeguard. One of the places that I worked, we had a very specific use case for XP Command Shell. So we wrapped everything in a stored procedure and we would enable it. We would have the whatever needed to happen, and then we would disable it. And that was all wrapped in code. So we were never exposing that XP Command Shell at any given time other than for that specific process. So wrapping it in a process, if you're going to do that kind of thing, is highly recommended. Before we head over to advanced threat detection and mitigation, do we have any new questions out here?
I don't see any right now.
Okay, awesome. I'm going to grab another drink. And we'll keep going. So we're going to talk about what you can do as far as threat detection and mitigation goes. So there's a proverb that says an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And I'm going to tell you what, this is true more than ever when it comes to securing your database or your data in general. And you need to employ practices that are going to detect, prevent, and mitigate your data exposure. So detecting is the first step. Using monitoring software, not only for your OS, but for your databases as well. There are lots and lots of monitoring software products out there that can help you with this. I would highly recommend you look into them. You don't have to purchase something. You can always create something on your own, but me being a DBA, again, I'm not lazy, I'm efficient. I don't like to reinvent the wheel. So I'm going to use a product that's probably off the shelf because they know a lot more about monitoring than I do. And they'll think of things that I've probably forgotten about. Your firewalls. Make sure that you are preventing inbound and outbound traffic appropriately. I see this all the time. I'll go into a client and their firewall is wide open. They don't have it based on domain or authentication. They have it open to the public so anybody can come in on certain ports. Make sure that you've got those firewall rules locked down and secured. Anomaly detection. So there are lots of different ways to detect anomalies. And when we talk about anomalies, we're talking about things that that aren't usual. They're kind of out there. So if you are using any kind of monitoring software, a lot of them will have that anomaly detection built in. So, if somebody is out there and you've seen a failed login 40 times in the last 30 seconds, that would be an anomaly. That would raise a really big red flag, and I would be very concerned about that. So make sure you've got some type of anomaly detection going on as part of your process there. System performance. So this is a big one, and it's probably one of the biggest indicators of some kind of breach on your system. If it like suddenly slows down for no apparent reason, I would be very suspect of that. You need to really make sure that you are monitoring not only auditing and that, but the performance of your system and using that as a tool to detect threats. Prevention. So when we talk about prevention, one of the things that you can do is you can harden your systems or your databases, like coding for SQL injection. Make sure that there is no way that you could incur a SQL injection attack. That's what we mean by hardening your systems. Make sure that if there are any ways to get in, you've closed those doors. Multi-factor authentication. If this is available, use it. Absolutely use it. I can't stress this enough. This is so important. Being a consultant, I have to log into many different client systems, and it's kind of a pain. I mean, I think I have over 10 authenticator apps on my phone, but you know what? An ounce of protection or prevention is worth a pound of cure. So I would rather have all of those different apps and go through that than to accidentally expose my client's data to in any situation. So if you've got multi-factor authentication available to you, definitely use it. Encryption, use it. If you have the ability to encrypt something, do it. Now, I do understand that sometimes this will incur some performance hit, but if it's done correctly, you have to weigh that back and forth to figure, I would rather have it just to be a hair slower than not encrypted. Just maybe I'm crazy, I don't know, but I would definitely use encryption if it's available out there. Mitigate. How can you mitigate any of these threats? The biggest one is to educate your users. This is key. There are so many scams and phishing and all of that and bad actors out there that are really relying on users not being educated. So, hey, I'm going to send them this email and hopefully they're going to click this link. If we make that email look really close to real, they're going to click it. They're not going to think twice. Educating your users is the biggest thing that you can do to mitigate any kind of threat. I have this story. One of the companies I used to work for before I had just started with them, they'd sent me to an on-site visit with a client. And we were hot and heavy in this design session, and we were going from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. We only took small breaks because we had so much work to get through. I had like 2 minutes to check my email. And I thought, okay, I'm going to do it really quick. Lo and behold, there was an email from my boss. Again, I'm doing this super fast because I only have 2 minutes to check my email. And he's asking me questions. And I thought it was an odd request, but I thought, well, you know what? I don't have time to do this right now. So I'm just going to reply and let him know. So I just replied and said, hey, I'm right in the middle of this with my client. Can I do this once I'm done with the client today after 8 p.m.? And as soon as I clicked the send button, I realized it was the whole gift card scam thing that I'd never seen before. And it happened because one, I'd never seen it before. I hadn't been educated. And two, I was in a hurry. These are things that bad actors rely on, is that you're not really paying that close attention and you're not educated. So educating your users is a huge, huge way to mitigate your risk. The principle of least privilege. This is another thing. Don't give anybody more access than they need to do their daily job. Full stop. And of course, if anybody remembers the whole Sarbanes-Oxley, SOX for short, you actually have to have different credentials to be able to do administrative things versus just everyday things. And I don't think that should be limited to just financial services. I think that should be everybody, everywhere. So you are very purposeful in how you are logging into something, knowing that I'm using my admin login. I need to be very aware of what I'm doing, kind of deal. And then patching, keeping your software up to date. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with what happened last week with CrowdStrike. Uh, I think I read something that it cost over $50 billion in revenue for that one mistake. I just read that this morning. That's a big mistake. Yes, you want to keep your systems up to date. One place that I used to work, they were a reverse logistics company, and their policy on patching was that they did it twice a month. The first part of the month, they would patch all of their development servers and they would let it run for 2 weeks. Make sure that there were no issues encountered. If everything passed all of the testing in those 2 weeks, then they would patch the production servers. So I'm not saying that that could have prevented the CrowdStrike thing, but that is a really good process to follow and not patch your production servers blindly. Make sure that you've tested that out there before you put it into your production system. I don't think everybody is home that was on Delta flights yet. I think there are some people who are actually still stranded and trying to get home. So that was a really, really big mistake. It was nothing nefarious. It was just an honest mistake. But again, that was a problem. So make sure that you are paying attention and keeping your software up to date, and you have a process in place to not go to production unless it's past your development. All right. Do we have any questions on threat detection and mitigation?
Looks like we're empty right now.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's start talking about encryption and data masking. And let's talk about kind of some best practices around those things. So when we're using data encryption, a lot of times you have different keys to encrypt and decrypt your data. Don't store that key, because typically it's a type of file. Don't store that key on the same hard drive of where you encrypted your stuff. That's like if somebody steals your hard drive, that's like giving them the keys to the kingdom. Use a key management system to store your encryption keys. I can't say that enough. Also, don't store those keys on somebody's local hard drive. What happens when they leave the company and that system gets wiped? Because that's typically what happens. If somebody leaves, their system gets wiped and then it gets handed to somebody else. Your key is gone. What happens if it was somebody's laptop and that laptop is stolen? Now somebody else has the key to your encryption and decryption. So use key management systems. There are lots of them out there. Think of key management systems as like password managers. There are lots of them out there, different kinds. I know that you can use Azure Key Vault for your key management system as well. I'm sure that other cloud providers have the same thing, or you can go even with third-party things out there to store your keys. So definitely use a key management system.
Angela, we have a
question.
A question about key management systems. Mike is wondering if you can recommend a couple key management tools that you've worked with.
I can absolutely do that. So like I said, Azure Key Vault, I use that for almost everything when it comes to all of my Azure infrastructure. So I will use that there. If it's not Azure specific, we use LastPass here. There's which that one's got some good things and some bad things. So I can't say that I can recommend it, but it does a decent job. I was trying to think, the name of the one that just went out of my head. I just had it. My ADD kicked in and the neighbors just drove by because they're clearing out all the brush. Anyway, sorry.
I was going to say that Tim in the chat has said that they utilize Keeper as another option.
Oh, yes. Very nice. Thank you.
Robert has chimed in with an additional question of what our take is on violating single points of failure when using key vaults.
All right. What's our take on a single point of failure when using Key Vault? So if you're using an Azure Key Vault, did you know that you can export those using PowerShell? That way you back up your key vaults, you store that information in a separate place, and then it's not a single point of failure. So that's what I do with my key vaults on a regular basis. I use PowerShell and I back them up into a secure location. It looks like, oh, somebody, yeah, Delinea Secret Server. That's who I was trying to think of. I could see the emblem in my head, but I couldn't think of the name. So yeah. Anything else about the key management systems? Any other questions?
I think Robert had just clarified and said, perhaps I should have said single point of hacking.
A single point of hacking. So Key Vault, again, we're going to go back to that principle of least privilege. People may be able to read your Key Vault, but do they need to read the secrets? Probably not. So make sure that you are following that principle of least privilege in your Key Vaults so that people can see the keys, but they can't see the secret values, because the key, the ID or the key isn't a value, doesn't have any value unless you can actually see the secret that's associated with it. So principle of least privilege is how I would handle that. Anything else?
I think that's it right now.
Okay, awesome. All right, so securing workstations. So, like I said, this was, I talked about that TV show that I saw, and every single machine was unlocked. It was in a law firm, and the first thing that I thought of was, oh my gosh, I would never use that law firm. Everybody walks away from their desk at night and leaves their workstations unlocked. My data is not secure. I realize that's like a super geeky data thing to think, but that's exactly what went through my head. And you know what? People don't realize that even when you're working from home, you need to secure your workstation. If COVID taught us nothing for those who had to end up working remotely, you need to secure your workstations, because you know what? Kids, cats can come in and start messing around and do things not necessarily intentionally or with any malintent, but it can happen. Super extreme example is, you get up to go to the kitchen to get a drink of water, you slip on the floor because you dropped you spilled water, then you have to call 911, and then you have strangers in your house, and your machine is not locked. So if anybody here has ever had to go through HIPAA training, you know that walking away from your workstation without it being locked is a HIPAA violation, the violation of the HIPAA rules, because you can accidentally expose that data. So I do that even here at the house. I work from home. I've worked from home for the last 14 years. Anytime I get up and leave my desk, I lock my workstation. It's just habit. And I actually got into that habit very early on in my career. My first boss out of college saw that I had walked away from my workstation and had not locked it. I was in the middle of creating some kind of design document in Word. And when I came back, I started, I kept working on my Word document, and I would type, but nothing would come up. And I was like, what the heck? What happened? I couldn't figure it out. Took me 30 to 45 minutes. I called the help desk. They couldn't figure it out. They're like, we can't find any problems. We rebooted it. We did all of these things. We couldn't figure it out. Turns out my boss, as a joke to teach me a lesson to never walk away from my machine while it was unlocked, had changed my font color to white. So when you type in white on a white background, you don't see anything. Your cursor moves, but you don't see anything. So I learned that lesson very early on, and that is something that has stuck with me to this day, almost 30 years later. Never walk away from your workstation without locking it. Nothing else to prevent your coworkers from playing a joke on you. Anyway, all right, let's talk about, disk encryption. So, use it. really, that's what I have to say about use disk encryption. That way, if your hard drive is ever stolen, or worse, your entire laptop is stolen, bad actors can't access the data that's on the disk. We talked about this a little bit before. Lots of different ways. If you're using a Microsoft product, a PC, you've got the option to use BitLocker. That's a Microsoft product. There are other third-party products out there that will do the same thing. This kind of, again, goes back to your key management system. Because it's encrypted, you have to store that key somewhere. You're going to have to put it in some kind of key management system if you do encrypt your drives so that you can unencrypt them. And lastly, we have VPNs. So unfortunately, bad actors are everywhere. They hang out at Starbucks, they hang out at McDonald's. You will even find them in the lobbies of convention centers. Why? Because they all have free Wi-Fi with no security whatsoever on them. That means that your traffic is passing along that in plain text, and anybody can grab your passwords. This is where a VPN can come in. You have a secure route from your device to wherever you are trying to connect to. It secures it, it's encrypted. I think with all of the different clients that I have to access, I've got like 6 or 7 different VPN products that we have to use just based on the different clients that we have. So if you are relying on free Wi-Fi, make sure you've got some kind of VPN protection in there. Do we have any questions about best practices when it comes to data encryption?
Don't see any at this point.
All right, well, let's keep going and let's start talking about data masking. This is our last topic today. We want to be able to use data masking so we can protect our data from prying eyes. What is data masking? Data masking is a method of obfuscating data so that people don't see it. It's still there, they just can't see it. And you've all experienced this whenever you type a password anywhere, you don't see the actual characters you type in, you see those little asterisks. That's data masking. Now, I just lost my train of thought because, again, squirrel, ADD. So do you need to classify, or do you need to mask all your data? Probably not. You really only need to mask what is important and is sensitive. So PII, HIPAA information, all kinds of stuff. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to classify your data. You need to figure out what is sensitive, what is not sensitive, and go from there. So things like credit card numbers, social security numbers, health ID numbers, those would be considered sensitive. So we can classify what's sensitive, what's not sensitive. Once we've done that, then we can go through and we can identify where that sensitive data lives. Is it in development? Is it in production? Is it, and then once we figure that out, what database is it? What table? What column? Narrow it down so that you know exactly where all of your sensitive data lives. And if you're not real sure about that, Microsoft does have a product. It's Azure Purview that will help you identify where your sensitive data lives. It is a paid product. It is not a free product. However, if you have other Azure SQL data resources, it will scan that automatically and let you know that you've got sensitive data, but it still has a cost associated with it. So just so that you are aware, you don't have to do it by hand. There are several products out there. I mean, Microsoft is not the only one. Informatica's got one. Talend has one. Calibra has one. Lots of different products out there on the market that are going to help you identify where your sensitive data lives. Once you have identified where it lives, you need to determine the best approach. This is going to go back to where your data lives. Is it in development? Is it in production? And that's what I mean, where it lives. In development, when we are creating applications, we still need, kind of real data to test with, but we don't want to expose anybody's real information. So we could do static data masking there, where everything that is sensitive gets blocked out, gets masked, and we can't see it. SQL Server also has dynamic data masking. That means it will mask the data depending on who the user is. So there is a little bit of overhead that comes with the dynamic, but so you can do either static or dynamic there. Like I said, static is really good for development environments, so that you're not accidentally exposing anything in your development environment. And it's obfuscating all of the sensitive data, regardless of who's accessing it or not. And then once you have determined your best approach, whether you want to go with a static or a dynamic approach, make sure that if you are using any other methods that require any keys to secure your masking technique, that you protect those. Because again, you don't want to give away the keys to the kingdom. So make sure that you protect any keys that you are using when you are masking your data, depending on what technique you're using. I know that there are some other products out there, not just SQL Server, that allow you to mask the data, but you have to have a key to be able to unmask the data. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about securing your masking technique. And with that, we are done talking about fortifying your database. I wanted to see if there were any other questions out there.
Yeah, if you have any, please drop them in the chat. We're happy to answer anything. We've got a few of our experts on the line. Can field a wide variety of questions.
Absolutely. And, right now we are running a database assessment special. And I'm going to let Andrea speak to this because she knows more about the business piece. I'm just the little monkey behind the curtain that does all the work. And I don't know anything about this piece. So I'm going to turn this over to Andrea.
Thank you. Well, Angela is one of our highly technical folks that could assist with this. If you are looking for an opportunity to we like to say, peek behind the curtain, see what's going on inside your database environment, we are running an assessment special for the month, all the way through the month of August, actually. It's kind of one of our ways to just peel back the covers, maybe see if there are opportunities to save some cost, whether it's some poorly performing code, whether it is an oversized environment, perhaps some of the security things just aren't quite where they should be. And as Angela spoke to earlier, we all think of the word audit, we think of the IRS, we kind of panic a bit, but this is actually kind of a nice chance for us to audit some of your systems and see where we can enhance some areas for you. So the assessment we would be performing is up to 10 SQL Server instances and for $7,000. And then there is a post-assessment option if you wanted to engage with us for a project. Based off of some of our findings, you will actually get a 25% discount on up to 25 hours. So quite a bit of time to be able to make a big difference in your data environment. So does anybody have any other questions for us?
Yeah, we've got about 10 minutes left, and we're happy to stay on and answer any questions that folks have until our time is up.
Yeah. And just as a preview, we are looking to put on another public webinar in September as well. And so we're open to, if you have some topics you'd like us to field for you, we are happy to entertain some of those topics. We've had a lot of questions around cloud, also around some end of life for some of the SQL versions. One of those is fast approaching. Angela may be able to remind us which one is fast approaching, but lots of changes coming up. Angela, it looks like Aubrey says, is there a risk in using a third-party tool such as Brent Ozar's SP_Blitz?
So there's always risk with third-party tools, always. It doesn't matter. You have to do your due diligence and understand exactly what those products are doing. so that you are not increasing your risk. Most of the time, you're going to be perfectly fine. I know Brent Ozar personally. He's not going to do anything nefarious with your data. So speaking to SP Blitz, I can't speak to that one specifically, only because I haven't used it enough to know what exactly it's doing. So there's always risk with third-party tools, always. You have to do your due diligence to make sure that nothing nefarious is happening behind the scenes.
And Angela, Robert has pitched an idea for a future webinar of the power of partitions on very large SQL tables.
Oh, I am so glad that Robert asked this, because we have folks here at Fortified who love doing this. And that would be a great thing to add. So absolutely, we will take that in there and add it to our list of upcoming webinars. Thank you, Robert.
I feel like that could also be like a superhero, like the power of partition. And Robert said if you have any ideas around that, send them to him as well. Looks like he's looking for a little assistance in that area. So,
okay.
Any other questions before we wrap up today? Well, as we mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we will be sending out the video access. So if you got pulled away or just want to review a few parts of it, you'll have access to that. We'll be following up with a survey as well. We are planning, like I mentioned, on doing this as kind of a series, so adding in one every couple months. So we'd love some feedback on our initial kickoff so that we kind of know what direction to take as we head into future webinars. So thank you everyone for your time, and a special thank you to Angela for sharing her knowledge, and Brenda and Chris being at the ready to answer any we may field today. So.
Oh, it looks like we've got one last question that just popped in there. What's the difference? What is the difference between encryption with SQL Server 2019 Enterprise and earlier Enterprise versions? So I think, do we have Chris or Brenda here to be able to go into the nitty-gritty that can answer that?
Sure. So when are you talking, what level of encryption are you talking? Database, I mean, your backups at rest, or are you talking column level encryption?
And I think that was Chris that asked that question. So Chris, if you're still on the line, if you could add a little bit of clarification on that, we'll see if Brenda can answer that for you.
Also, Chris, if you'd like, I can take this one offline. This is one of our clients. I've worked with Chris, so I can take this one offline, Chris, if you'd like, and we can meet and discuss it.
Okay. Oh, yep. And he says he will reach out to you. Awesome.
Perfect.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you everyone, and we look forward to seeing you, and feel free to spread the word. We're happy to engage with even a larger audience next time. So, all right. Have a great week, everyone. Thank you.